want to start now?
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
so I'll begin by mentioning a number of things that I think might be of interest, and then I'll answer any questions that I can possibly answer. I'll try my best. The Crown's office has gone to extraordinary lengths, in my view, to try to stop the public from learning what happened in this event, from learning the evidence at the preliminary inquiry. It's quite extraordinary the amount of expense that they've gone to in doing it, and I would hope people would demand an explanation and would demand to know how much money they spent on it. And they forced the CBC and Mr. Brant, who were opposing this publication ban, to go to a lot of expense in trying to counter it. It was quite extraordinary, and I'll answer more questions about details there. But the most important issue here, in my view, is the evidence of Commissioner Fantino at the preliminary inquiry. The Crown said they were trying to stop that, make it banned, because it might interfere with Shawn Brant's fair trial interests. Well, anybody who wants to consider whether or not the evidence of the preliminary inquiry would interfere with Shawn Brant's interests can look in particular at the evidence of Chief Fantino, which is on the CBC website. And there was a lot of other evidence too, but all the evidence that was really inculpatory of Mr. Brant was evidence provided by TV cameras beforehand and wasn't covered by the ban. Because Mr. Brant has been totally open and honest throughout all of his activities, and he's announced what was going to happen. This was going to be a limited blockade on June 29, limited to the day of action, time limited, and he announced what he was going to do ahead of time, and he was videotaped doing it, and he's not going to deny it at all at trial. Now, what about Mr. Fantino's attitude towards this? We've had an IPWASH inquiry. And towards the end of the IPWASH inquiry, the OPP made representations that their attitude has changed since 1995. And they understand that you have to negotiate with Aboriginal people, you have to deal with them recognizing special interests, including the fact that they have legitimate concerns often and so on. In cross-examining Commissioner Fantino at the preliminary inquiry, I put to him a document that reflected those concerns from the OPP and also mentioned the IPWASH inquiry. And here's one question and one answer that might be considered. Question: Sir, I put it to you that the document that we looked at and the concerns of the IPWASH inquiry and many other concerns that you're aware of have indicated that in situations like this, for the public good, as well as for the respect of the protesters involved, it's important to understand where they're coming from, Mr. Rosenthal, and deal with their cultural values and so on. Mr. Rosenthal, there's nothing in the spirit, the intent, or the written word in this document that justifies criminal conduct, or that exonerates people from accountability for criminal conduct, or that it absents me as a law enforcement officer from exercising discretion or using that authority bestowed upon me to effect a lawful purpose. Well, that's true in a way that he has the lawful authority, but he was instructed, and the OPP made a commitment in the IPWASH inquiry to recognize special concerns in the case of Aboriginal blockades. They're always illegal. It's always like that. And there are special concerns about getting Aboriginal negotiators and so on. There are a whole bunch of things from the IPWASH inquiry. Mr. Fantino, in my submission, does not recognize that. Premier McGuinty was quoted in today's press as saying he has lots of faith in Commissioner Fantino. I would respectfully request that Premier McGuinty read the cross-examination of Commissioner Fantino posted on the CBC website, get his Minister of Aboriginal Affairs, Michael Bryant, to read it, and see if he still has that confidence in light of the IPWASH inquiry. Now, there were a number of other very interesting pieces of evidence at the preliminary inquiry that the Crown sought to suppress. In particular, we were notified on the eve of the preliminary inquiry that there had been an extraordinary wiretap against Shawn Brant. Wiretaps are recognized to be an extreme invasion of privacy, and if you contemplate being wiretapped, you'll know what I mean. Not because you're doing any criminal activity, but because of all the intimate conversations you may have on your phone. It's an extreme invasion of privacy to have police officers sitting around listening to those conversations. So there are protections in the criminal code. Normally, a judicial authorization is required. There's a special provision of the criminal code section 184.4, that allows an emergency wiretap where you don't have time to go in front of a judge. Somebody kidnaps a baby and runs into a house, and you want to find out right then what's happening. You don't have time to go downtown. You call up the telephone company and get a tap on that phone. They used that section of the criminal code to wiretap Mr. Brant, even though he had announced his intentions for weeks before. They didn't go in front of a judge. And they were considering not even telling us that they had done it. That section of the criminal code allowing those extraordinary wiretaps has been subsequently declared unconstitutional, but by a British Columbia court. But whether or not it's unconstitutional, it's inconceivable in my view that they followed its provisions, which require the emergency nature. They knew everything about Shawn Brant way before. If they wanted to tap his phone, they should have gone in front of a judge. What did Commissioner Fantino say about that? He's head of the OPP, and they did this extraordinary invasion of Mr. Brant's privacy. What does he say when asked what he's going to do about it? Question. Would you agree there's a possibility there was some impropriety by officers in obtaining this wiretap? The evidence, he said he didn't know anything about it. And it was quite extraordinary. He never heard of such one being done. He knew it could be done, but he never heard of it. Would you agree there's a possibility there's some impropriety by officers? I'm convinced there's no such allegation worth responding to. Well, I'm making that allegation right now, sir. Do you understand that's an allegation? And I'm not prepared to respond to it, sir. Question, I appreciate that. Answer, I believe everything that we did was in the greater good, and that's my understanding. Question, and you know nothing about what happened. I know lots about what happened. With respect to this wiretap, no, I don't. He didn't know anything about what happened with respect to the wiretap, he says, extraordinary as it was, and he wasn't even going to investigate. This is the commissioner of the Ontario Provincial Police, post-Ippewash. And if you hear what he said to Mr. Brant, and you read his explanations in his cross-examination as to his attitude toward Mr. Brant, you will not, in my opinion, come to the conclusion that he was consistent with Ippewash. I asked at the beginning of cross-examining him, Mr. Brant was respectful to you, wasn't he? And he said yes. And if you read the conversation, you'll know that he was. He said yes, he was, and I was respectful to him. And then I challenged Mr. Fantino on that throughout the cross-examination, and you can see, if you consider what he said to Shawn Brant, the threats that he said to Shawn Brant to destroy his reputation and so on, is respectful.